I watched the chainsaw tear through the first 100-year-old oak like it was paper, and my blood ran cold. The tree that had shaded my lakefront property every summer morning crashed down with a sound that made my chest hurt. 3 more followed before I could even get my boots on and sprint outside. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted over the roar of the saw. The worker, a tired-looking guy in his 30s, killed the engine and pointed toward a woman standing on the edge of my property. She wore pressed khakis and a polo shirt with the Pine Valley Estates HOA logo embroidered on it, her blonde hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. "Nathan Miller?" she called out, consulting a clipboard like she was checking off a shopping list. "That's my property you're destroying," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "Those trees have been there longer than this neighborhood existed." She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that made you want to check your wallet. "I'm Barbara Hendricks, president of the Pine Valley HOA board. Those trees were in violation of Code 7.3, subsection B, which clearly states that no vegetation may exceed 20 feet in height within 50 feet of the property line bordering common areas." Common areas? That's the lake. The public lake that existed before this HOA was even a thought. Barbara's smile tightened. "The HOA owns the access rights and shoreline management for all properties in Pine Valley Estates. When you purchased your home here in Madison, Wisconsin, you agreed to our covenants, conditions, and restrictions. I had bought the house 6 months ago specifically for those trees. The property sat on Lake Mendota's northern shore, and the massive oaks provided privacy from the cluster of newer homes that had sprung up on the hill behind mine. Those residents had premium lots marketed as having breathtaking lake views, which apparently meant my trees were unacceptable obstacles to their scenic enjoyment." "I never received any notice about this," I said. Barbara flipped through papers on her clipboard. "We sent 3 written notices to your address. The final notice was sent certified mail 14 days ago, giving you 72 hours to comply or face HOA remediation at your expense." "I never got any certified mail. That's not the HOA's problem. The notices were sent to the address on file. Perhaps you should check with your postal carrier." She nodded to the work crew. "Continue, please." "Stop," I said, stepping between them and my remaining trees. "I'm telling you right now, do not touch another tree." Barbara sighed like I was a difficult child. "Mr. Miller, you're interfering with authorized HOA enforcement actions. The tree removal is happening today, and you'll receive an invoice for the work within 5 business days. If you continue to obstruct, I'll have no choice but to call the authorities." "Call them," I said. "I'd love to have this on record." She actually pulled out her phone, and within 10 minutes a Madison Police Department cruiser rolled up. The officer who got out looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "What's the situation here?" he asked. Barbara launched into her explanation, waving her clipboard like it was a legal document bestowed by God himself. The officer listened, then turned to me. "Sir, do you have any documentation showing you have the right to prevent this work?" "I own the property. Those are my trees." "But you're part of an HOA?" "Apparently, though I'm starting to seriously question what I signed up for." The officer rubbed his forehead. "Look, this is a civil matter. If the HOA is claiming they have the right to do this work and you disagree, you need to handle it through the courts or your HOA dispute resolution process. I can't stop them from proceeding if they have documentation of proper notice." "I never received the notices," I repeated. "That's for a judge to decide, not me." "I'm sorry, but my hands are tied here. This isn't a criminal matter." I watched helplessly as 3 more of my beautiful oak trees came down over the next hour. The workers were efficient and professional, which somehow made it worse. They cleaned up the debris, hauled away the massive trunks, and ground down the stumps until my lakefront looked like a construction zone. Where I'd once had privacy and shade, I now had an unobstructed view up the hill to the houses behind mine, and they had their precious lake view. Barbara handed me a pamphlet before she left. "The HOA meets the first Tuesday of every month at 7 p.m. in the community center. You're welcome to voice your concerns through proper channels." "Have a nice day, Mr. Miller." I stood in my devastated yard until sunset, trying to process what had just happened. When I finally went inside, I found a stack of mail on my kitchen counter that I'd been too busy to sort through. Buried in the junk mail and bills were 3 letters from the Pine Valley Estates HOA. The certified mail slip was there too, dated from 2 weeks ago. I'd been traveling for work and must have missed the postal carrier. It didn't matter. Even if I'd gotten the notices, 72 hours wouldn't have been enough time to fight this through legal channels. The whole system was designed to railroad homeowners into compliance. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I pulled up the HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions on my laptop and started reading. It was 147 pages of dense legalese, but I was going to know every single word by morning. That's when I found it. Section 12, subsection F, paragraph 3. Homeowners maintain the right to construct privacy fences or walls on their property provided such structures comply with local zoning ordinances and do not exceed 30 feet in height. 30 feet. The HOA's own rules allowed me to build a 30-foot wall. By sunrise, I was on the phone with a real estate attorney named Marcus Chen. His office was in downtown Madison, and he agreed to see me that afternoon. "This is pretty straightforward," Marcus said after reviewing my case. The HOA did follow proper procedure for the tree removal, assuming their covenants actually give them authority over mature trees. That's debatable, but it would take months and thousands of dollars to litigate. However, you're absolutely correct about the fence provision. If local zoning allows it, you can build your wall. Will the HOA try to stop me? They can try, but their own rules authorize it. They'd have to go through the process of changing their covenants, which requires a supermajority vote of homeowners, and can take 6 months to a year. By then, your wall would be built. What about building permits? Madison has specific zoning for your area. Let me make some calls. By the end of the day, I had my answer. The city zoning for lakefront properties in my area allowed structures up to 35 feet with proper engineering approval. My property was large enough that setback requirements wouldn't be an issue. I could build my wall. I hired an engineer that week, a woman named Patricia Anderson who specialized in residential construction. We walked the property together and I explained what I wanted. A 30-foot privacy wall along the back property line, Patricia said, taking measurements. That's going to be substantial. We're talking about serious concrete work, proper foundation reinforcement. This isn't a weekend DIY project. I understand. How much are we looking at? She did some quick calculations. Materials and labor. You're probably looking at $70,000 to $90,000 for something that size. Maybe more depending on finishing. I winced, but my annual salary as a software architect could handle it. Let's do it right. I want it to last. It'll outlast all of us, Patricia said. I'll have plans drawn up by next week. The HOA invoice arrived 3 days later. They were billing me $18,000 for the tree removal. I paid it immediately, which seemed to surprise Barbara when I dropped off the check at the community center. "I'm glad you're being reasonable about this," she said. "Just following the rules," I replied. "Speaking of which, I wanted to give you a courtesy notice that I'll be starting construction on a privacy wall next month." Her smile evaporated. "What kind of wall?" 30 feet high, running along my back property line. Section 12, subsection F, paragraph 3 of our covenants allows it. Barbara's face went through several interesting color changes. That section refers to standard privacy fences, not massive walls. It specifically says fences or walls, and it specifically says up to 30 feet. I had an attorney review it. This will require HOA approval. Actually, it won't. The covenant doesn't require pre-approval for structures that comply with the stated guidelines. It only requires notification, which I'm providing now. "We'll see about that," Barbara said. "The board will be discussing this." "I'll be at the next meeting," I said, looking forward to it. I walked out feeling better than I had since the trees came down. The look on Barbara's face had been worth every penny I was about to spend. The next HOA meeting was packed. Word had apparently spread about my planned construction project. I recognized several faces from the houses on the hill behind mine, all looking concerned. Barbara sat at the front table with 4 other board members, including a balding man named Gregory Sanders, who was vice president, and a younger woman named Melissa Chen, who was the secretary. "Before we begin regular business," Barbara announced, "we need to address a situation involving 4782 Lakeshore Drive. Mr. Miller has announced plans to construct a 30-foot wall on his property." A murmur ran through the crowd. "This is obviously unacceptable," Barbara continued. "Such a structure would be an eyesore and would negatively impact property values for multiple homes in our community." I raised my hand. "Point of order. I'm not requesting permission. I'm informing the board of my plans as required by our covenants." "Mr. Miller," Gregory Sanders said, "surely you understand that a 30-foot wall is excessive and unreasonable." "What I understand is that the HOA cut down 6 mature oak trees that were providing privacy for my property. Those trees were there when most of these houses were built. Now I need to restore that privacy through other means." A woman from the audience spoke up. "We bought our homes specifically for the lake views. Your wall would block that completely. And I bought my home specifically for the trees that provided privacy." I shot back. "The HOA destroyed my property to enhance yours. Now I'm using my property rights to restore what I lost." Barbara shuffled papers loudly. "The board will be seeking legal counsel on this matter. We believe Mr. Miller is misinterpreting the covenants." "I've already had an attorney review them," I said. "I'm happy to provide you with his analysis. The language is clear. Walls up to 30 feet are permitted." "That provision was obviously intended for standard 6-foot privacy fences," Melissa said. "Then it should have said 6 feet. It says 30 feet. I'm building a 30-foot wall." The meeting devolved into chaos after that. Multiple homeowners wanted to speak, most of them angry about my plans. Barbara finally called for order and moved on to other business, but I could feel the hostility in the room. After the meeting, a few people approached me in the parking lot. One of them was a man in his 60s named Robert Turner. "I own the property 3 houses down from you," he said. "I just want you to know that not everyone thinks what happened to your trees was right. Barbara's been on a power trip for the last 2 years. She's alienated half the neighborhood with her enforcement crusades. Why don't people vote her out?" Robert laughed bitterly. "Most people don't show up to meetings. The ones who do are either Barbara's friends or people she's bullied into compliance. She runs this HOA like her personal fiefdom. Someone should challenge her. Good luck with that." The last person who tried ended up with so many violation notices and fines that they eventually sold their house and moved. "Barbara can make your life miserable if she wants to." "She already has," I said. "Now it's my turn." Construction began 3 weeks later. The engineering plans had been approved by the city, all permits were in order, and I'd hired an excellent construction company called Precision Builders. The foreman was a guy named Tommy Rodriguez who'd built half the commercial buildings in downtown Madison. "This is the most interesting project I've had in years," Tommy said as we reviewed the plans on site. "A 30-foot residential privacy wall. You must really want privacy. You have no idea." The first week involved excavation and foundation work. A crew of 8 workers dug a trench 4 feet deep and 3 feet wide along my entire back property line. They installed rebar and poured concrete footings that would support the massive wall. Concrete trucks rumbled in and out of my driveway from dawn until dusk. Barbara showed up on day 3 with a city inspector in tow. "We're here to verify that all permits are in order," she announced. Tommy handed the inspector a folder without saying a word. The inspector reviewed everything, checked the work, and nodded. "Everything looks good. You've got proper permits and the work meets code." Barbara's jaw tightened. "What about noise ordinances?" "They're starting work at 7 a.m. 7 a.m. is within legal construction hours," the inspector said. "Sorry, madam, there's nothing wrong here." After they left, Tommy shook his head. "That lady really doesn't like you. The feeling is mutual." By the end of week 2, the foundation was complete and the framework was going up. Precision Builders used a combination of reinforced concrete and steel for structural integrity. The wall was designed to withstand Wisconsin's harsh winters and severe weather. This thing wasn't going anywhere. People started stopping by to watch. Some were just curious, but others were clearly angry. A woman named Jennifer Morrison from one of the hill houses confronted me while I was checking on the progress. "Do you have any idea what you're doing to our property values?" she demanded. "We paid a premium for lake views." "I paid a premium for lakefront property with mature trees," I said. "The HOA destroyed that. Take it up with them. You're being vindictive and petty." "I'm exercising my property rights. If you want to be angry at someone, be angry at Barbara Hendricks. She's the one who decided those trees had to go." Jennifer stormed off, and I saw her talking to several other neighbors. I had a feeling things were about to escalate. I was right. 2 days later, someone spray-painted "selfish" across my garage door. I filed a police report, but the officer who responded said there wasn't much they could do without witnesses or security footage. "You might want to consider installing cameras," he suggested. I installed 6 cameras that afternoon. High definition, night vision, covering every angle of my property. If anyone wanted to vandalize my house again, I'd have them on video. The wall reached 15 feet by the start of week 4. It was impressive, a smooth concrete surface that curved gently along my property line. Tommy's crew was doing exceptional work and the structure looked almost elegant despite its size. That's when the HOA filed for an injunction. Marcus Chen called me on a Tuesday morning. "Barbara Hendricks and the Pine Valley HOA are seeking a court order to halt construction. They're claiming the wall violates the spirit of the covenants and represents a nuisance." "Can they win?" "Unlikely, but it'll tie things up for a few weeks while the judge reviews the case. You'll need to appear at a hearing next Friday." The hearing was held at the Dane County Courthouse. I wore my best suit and brought a folder full of documentation. Barbara showed up with Gregory Sanders and an attorney named David Walsh who looked expensive. Judge Patricia Morrison reviewed the case materials for 20 minutes before speaking. "Mr. Walsh, your argument is that the covenant provision allowing 30-foot walls was never intended to authorize structures of this scale?" "Exactly, Your Honor. The provision was written decades ago for standard residential fencing. No reasonable interpretation would suggest it allows a 30-foot concrete wall." "Mr. Chen?" Marcus stood. "Your Honor, the covenant language is explicit and unambiguous. It states, and I quote, 'Walls or fences up to 30 feet in height.' There's no qualification about intent or scale." The OA had multiple opportunities to modify their covenants if they felt this provision was problematic. They chose not to. "What about the nuisance claim?" the judge asked. "The wall is being constructed entirely on Mr. Miller's property, in compliance with all city codes and zoning regulations. It doesn't create noise beyond normal construction, it doesn't impact anyone else's property rights, and it doesn't violate any laws. The HOA's real objection is that some residents preferred having lake views across Mr. Miller's property, but they never had any legal right to those views. Judge Morrison nodded slowly. Mr. Walsh, did the HOA have authority to remove the trees from Mr. Miller's property? The covenants grant the HOA authority to maintain community aesthetics and standards, Your Honor. That's not what I asked. Did Mr. Miller's trees actually violate the covenant he's accused of violating? David Walsh hesitated. The trees exceeded the height limit specified in Code 7.3 subsection B, which was written to address what exactly? Vegetation management along common areas. And these trees were how old? Approximately 100 years, so they existed long before the HOA was established, before the subdivision was developed, and before any of these covenants were written? Yes, Your Honor, but that doesn't exempt them from current rules. Judge Morrison leaned back in her chair. Here's what I see. The HOA used a questionable interpretation of their own rules to destroy mature trees on Mr. Miller's property, primarily to benefit other residents who wanted lake views. Now Mr. Miller is using an explicit provision in those same rules to restore his privacy, and the HOA claims he's violating the spirit of their covenants. I find this argument unconvincing. Barbara's face went red, but she stayed quiet. The injunction is denied, Judge Morrison said. Mr. Miller may continue construction. The HOA is free to pursue this matter through a full civil trial if they wish, but I'm not halting the work. Next case. I felt like I'd won the lottery. Outside the courthouse, Marcus clapped me on the shoulder. That went well. Judge Morrison clearly thinks the HOA overreached with the tree removal.
Will they try a full trial?
Doubtful. It would cost them tens of thousands in legal fees, and after that hearing, I don't think they're confident about winning. My guess is they'll back off and focus on changing their covenants for the future. He was right. The HOA dropped the matter and construction resumed the next day. By week 6, the wall was complete. 30 feet of solid, reinforced concrete running the entire length of my back property line. We'd finished it with a textured surface that looked like natural stone, and Tommy's crew had even added some architectural details so it didn't look completely institutional. It's beautiful, Tommy said on the last day. Probably the most overbuilt privacy wall in Wisconsin, but beautiful. I paid the final invoice, $87,000 in total, and stood in my backyard admiring the work. The wall blocked every single house on the hill behind mine. Where they'd once had perfect views of Lake Mendota, they now saw 30 feet of concrete. My property, meanwhile, felt private and secluded again. It wasn't the same as the trees, but it would do. The fallout was immediate and intense. Barbara called an emergency HOA meeting 2 days after construction finished. I showed up expecting fireworks. This is unacceptable, Barbara announced to the packed room. Mr. Miller has constructed a monstrosity that damages the character of our entire community. I constructed a wall that your own covenants explicitly allow, I said. If you don't like it, change the covenants. We're calling for a vote to do exactly that, Gregory Sanders said. Effective immediately, we're proposing an amendment to limit wall and fence height to 8 feet. That's fine with me, I said. My wall is already built. The amendment won't apply retroactively. We're also proposing that existing non-compliant structures be brought into compliance within 6 months. Barbara added with a smile. Marcus Chen stood up from the back of the room. I'd invited him to attend as my legal observer. That would be a regulatory taking, Marcus said calmly. If the HOA forces Mr. Miller to demolish a legally constructed structure that was in full compliance with all rules at the time of construction, they'll be liable for the full cost plus damages. We're talking about a $250,000 lawsuit at minimum. The room went quiet. Additionally, Marcus continued, forcing a homeowner to destroy an expensive structure through retroactive rule changes would likely violate Wisconsin property law. Any court would see it as punitive and targeted. The HOA would lose, and they'd lose expensively. Barbara's confident expression cracked. We'll let our attorney review that. Please do, Marcus said. I'd be happy to discuss it with them. The vote on the amendment passed easily, but the retroactive enforcement clause was removed. My wall was safe, and I'd effectively closed the loophole I'd used. I didn't care. I had what I needed. Life settled into a new normal over the next few months. My wall became a minor celebrity in Madison. Local news did a story about it, framing it as a David versus Goliath tale of homeowner rights. The coverage was mostly sympathetic to me, which didn't help Barbara's already struggling reputation. The houses behind mine, the ones that had lost their lake views, took a hit on property values. Jennifer Morrison's house went on the market 3 months after the wall went up. She'd listed it for $650,000 but ended up selling for $580,000. I felt a little bad about that, but not much. They'd benefited from the removal of my trees, and they'd supported Barbara's decision. Actions have consequences. Robert Turner stopped by one evening with a bottle of wine. "I wanted to thank you," he said as we sat on my deck overlooking the lake. "Barbara announced she's not running for HOA president next term." "Really?" "Half the neighborhood thinks she's a tyrant, and the other half blames her for the property value drops. She's lost her power base." "Gregory Sanders isn't running either. There's talk of electing people who want to reform how the HOA operates." "That's good news." "It's more than good. You proved that homeowners can push back. A lot of people were scared of the HOA before. Now they see it differently." We toasted to that. The following month's HOA meeting had a completely different tone. Barbara sat in the audience for the first time in years, looking diminished. A woman named Patricia Alvarez was running the meeting as interim president. She was younger, more reasonable, and actually seemed interested in serving the community rather than ruling it. "We need to talk about reforming our enforcement processes," Patricia said. "Several homeowners have raised concerns about how violations are handled, particularly around notice requirements and appeals." The discussion that followed was productive and civil. People actually listened to each other. It was remarkable how much difference leadership made. I raised my hand. "I'd like to propose that the HOA establish a formal appeals process before any major enforcement action. If someone's going to have trees cut down or face significant fines, they should have a chance to present their case to the board first." "That's a good idea," Patricia said. "Can you work with the compliance committee to draft a proposal?" I agreed, and over the next 2 months, we completely overhauled the HOA's enforcement procedures. The new system required multiple notices with proof of delivery, a mandatory review period, and a hearing before the board for any enforcement action over $5,000. It wouldn't have saved my trees, but it would protect future homeowners from similar situations. Barbara attended one more meeting before disappearing entirely. She sold her house in Pine Valley Estates and moved somewhere across town. I heard she'd joined another HOA board, but I didn't know if that was true. I hoped she'd learned something from our conflict, but I suspected she probably just blamed me for everything. My wall developed its own ecosystem over the next year. Vines started growing on the lakeside surface, and birds nested in the crevices. It began to look less like a concrete barrier and more like a natural part of the landscape. Neighbors who'd initially hated it started to admit it wasn't as bad as they'd feared. The real surprise came 18 months after construction finished. A developer approached me about buying my property. "The wall is actually an asset," he explained. "There's a market for ultra-private lakefront properties. Rich people will pay a premium for that kind of seclusion." He offered me $900,000. I'd paid $450 for the house. Even after the cost of the wall, I'd make a huge profit if I sold. I thought about it for a week, then declined. I'd fought too hard for this place to give it up now. The wall wasn't just about privacy anymore. It was about standing up for property rights and not letting bullies push you around. It was a monument to the principle that sometimes you have to fight back, even when it's expensive and difficult. Besides, I'd grown to love the wall. It was ugly and excessive and completely unnecessary by any objective standard. But it was mine, and it represented something important. Jennifer Morrison's house sold again 2 years after my wall went up. The new owners were a young couple named Daniel and Sarah. They knocked on my door a week after moving in. "We wanted to introduce ourselves," Daniel said. "We're your neighbors from up the hill." I braced myself for complaints about the wall. "We actually love your wall," Sarah said. "The previous owners complained about it constantly, but we think it's cool." Very dramatic. "You're not upset about losing the lake view?" Daniel laughed. "We got the house for $100,000 under market because of the wall. We weren't buying for the view anyway. We're both introverts who work from home. We like the privacy it creates." We became friends after that. They were good neighbors, and they understood why I'd built the wall. It turned out that not everyone in Pine Valley Estates had supported Barbara's tree removal crusade. A lot of people had stayed quiet because they didn't want to become her next target. The HOA continued to reform under Patricia Alvarez's leadership. She served 2 terms as president, then handed it off to a retired engineer named Marcus Thompson, who was equally reasonable. Pine Valley Estates became a genuinely nice place to live again. People stopped being afraid of the HOA and started viewing it as what it was supposed to be. A tool for maintaining the community's common areas and handling shared concerns. I planted new trees along the front of my property, native species that would eventually grow tall and provide shade. They'd never replace the oaks I'd lost, but they were a start. I also started attending every HOA meeting, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. If I'd been involved earlier, maybe I could have prevented the whole situation. Maybe I could have challenged Barbara before she destroyed my trees, or maybe not. Maybe the wall was always inevitable. Maybe some lessons can only be learned the hard way, and some battles have to be fought even when you'd rather avoid them. 5 years after the wall went up, a magazine called Architectural Digest contacted me. They were doing a feature on unusual residential structures and wanted to include my wall. It's become somewhat iconic in property rights circles, the writer explained. People reference it in HOA disputes across the country. You've become the poster child for homeowner pushback. I agreed to the interview. The article came out 3 months later with professional photos of my wall, my property, and the lake. They framed it as a story about standing up to overreach and defending your rights. The article brought a wave of attention. I got emails from people dealing with their own HOA nightmares asking for advice. I always told them the same thing: know your rules, document everything, and don't be afraid to fight if you're in the right. Most HOAs count on homeowners being too intimidated or too busy to push back. Once you demonstrate that you're willing to fight, they often back down. A few law schools even asked me to speak about property rights and HOA governance. I wasn't a lawyer, but I had practical experience that resonated with students. I talked about how HOAs can serve important functions, but how they can also become instruments of petty tyranny if left unchecked. I emphasized the importance of participation and oversight. Most HOA problems happen because homeowners don't pay attention until it's too late. 10 years after the wall went up, I finally sold my property. Not because I wanted to leave, but because I got an offer I couldn't refuse. A tech entrepreneur from California offered me $1.3 million. He'd read the Architectural Digest article and was fascinated by the wall. He wanted to own a piece of property rights history. I took the money and bought a small cabin in northern Wisconsin, right on Lake Superior. No HOA, no neighbors within shouting distance, just water and trees and peace. I was 52 years old and could afford to semi-retire. I still did consulting work, but mostly I just enjoyed the quiet before I left Pine Valley Estates. I attended one last HOA meeting. Patricia Alvarez had moved away years ago, and the current president was a younger guy named Thomas Reed who'd moved in about 3 years back. The HOA had grown and evolved, but the reforms we'd implemented were still in place. "We wanted to thank you for your service to the community," Thomas said at the meeting. "Your advocacy led to changes that made Pine Valley a better place to live." People applauded. It was surreal. 10 years ago, half these people had hated me. Now they were thanking me. "I just did what I had to do," I said. "Sometimes you have to stand up for yourself." That's all I did. After the meeting, I drove past my old property one last time. The wall still stood, exactly as I'd built it. The vines had completely covered the lake-facing side now, making it look almost natural. The trees I'd planted in front had grown tall and healthy. The new owner had maintained everything beautifully. I thought about Barbara Hendricks and wondered where she was now. I'd heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she'd tried to run for HOA president in her new neighborhood and lost badly. Apparently her reputation had preceded her. I hoped she'd learned something, but I suspected she probably just blamed the world for not understanding her vision. My cabin on Lake Superior became my sanctuary. I spent my days kayaking, reading, and working on consulting projects when the mood struck. I had enough money to live comfortably, no debt, and no HOA telling me what I could do with my property. But I thought about that wall often. It represented the most stressful, expensive, and ultimately satisfying fight of my life. It proved that you don't have to accept injustice just because it comes with official letterhead and citations of rules and regulations. Sometimes the rules are wrong. Sometimes the people enforcing the rules are bullies. And sometimes you have to spend $87,000 in months of your life just to prove a point. Was it worth it? Absolutely, not just for me, but for everyone who came after. The reforms we implemented at Pine Valley Estates protected hundreds of homeowners from similar situations. My story inspired people across the country to stand up to HOA overreach. And every time someone sent me an email saying my wall had given them the courage to fight their own battle, I knew it had been worth every penny and every ounce of stress. The trees were gone, but they'd been replaced by something more permanent. A 30-foot concrete monument to the principle that your home is your castle, and no HOA board has the right to take that away from you without a fight. I still have photos of those oak trees. Sometimes I look at them and feel angry all over again about their loss. But then I think about the wall and I smile. Barbara Hendricks wanted to improve views for a few homeowners on the hill. Instead, she ended up creating the most famous privacy wall in America, and losing her position of power. Stocks have consequences. The HOA learned that lesson. Barbara learned that lesson. And I learned that sometimes you have to fight, even when it seems crazy, even when it costs more than it should, even when everyone tells you to just accept what happened and move on. Because sometimes moving on means building a 30-foot wall and making sure it never happens to anyone else again. Years later, I received an email from a law student at the University of Wisconsin. She was writing her thesis on property rights and HOA governance, and my case was one of her primary examples. "Your wall has been cited in 17 court cases across 12 states," she wrote. "It's become precedent for homeowner rights. Judges reference it when HOAs try to use vague covenant language to restrict property use. You changed HOA law in America. I hadn't known that. I'd just been trying to restore my privacy and make a point. The idea that my wall had become actual legal precedent was mind-blowing. The student wanted to interview me for her thesis. We talked for 3 hours, and she asked questions I'd never considered. How did I maintain my resolve during the construction? What would I have done if the judge had granted the injunction? Did I ever consider just accepting the tree removal and moving on? Moving on would have meant accepting that the HOA could destroy my property to benefit someone else, I told her. That wasn't acceptable. If I'd let it go, they would have done it to the next person, and the next. Someone had to push back. But why you? Why not someone else? I thought about that. Because I had the resources and the stubbornness to see it through. A lot of people can't afford an $87,000 statement. I could. That made it my responsibility. Her thesis was published the following year. She sent me a copy, and I read it with genuine interest. She'd done excellent work tracing how HOAs had evolved from simple maintenance organizations into quasi-governmental bodies with enormous power over homeowners. My case was her primary example of successful resistance, but she'd found dozens of others. A movement was growing, she argued, of homeowners refusing to accept HOA overreach. I hoped she was right. I hoped my wall had started something bigger than just one man's fight with one power-hungry HOA president. On the 15th anniversary of the day my trees came down, I drove back to Madison. I hadn't been back in 5 years, and I was curious about how things had changed. Pine Valley Estates looked different. The houses had aged, landscapes had matured, and several properties had changed hands. I drove past my old house slowly. The wall still stood, of course. Concrete doesn't care about time. But the new owner had done something interesting. He'd commissioned a mural on the street-facing side of the wall, a beautiful piece showing the lake and the oak trees that used to grow there. It was a memorial and a work of art, and it transformed the wall from a barrier into something beautiful. I pulled over and stared at it for a long time. The artist had captured the trees perfectly, right down to the way the light filtered through their leaves at sunset. It was the view I'd lost, preserved forever in paint. A man came out of the house and approached my car. I recognized him from the photos in the real estate listing, the tech entrepreneur who'd bought the property. "Nathan Miller," he asked. "That's me. I was just in the area and wanted to see the old place." "Come in," he said. "I've always wanted to meet you." His name was Peter, and he'd turned my house into something extraordinary. Smart home technology throughout, solar panels on the roof, a complete renovation of the interior. But he'd kept the wall exactly as I'd built it. "It's the whole reason I bought this place," Peter said as we stood in the backyard. "The wall represents something important. The mural was my way of honoring that." "It's beautiful," I said. "Better than anything I would have done." "The neighbors have actually started to like it," Peter said. "It's become a landmark. People give directions based on it. Turn left at the big wall, that sort of thing." We talked for hours. Peter had followed my story for years and had his own HOA nightmare in California that had inspired him to move. He'd wanted a place where he had control over his own property, and my house represented that. "You know what's funny?" Peter said. "The HOA here is actually great now. They maintain the common areas, they're responsive to concerns, and they don't bother anyone about petty stuff. Your fight changed the culture." That made me happier than anything else could have. The whole point had been to create change, to make sure future homeowners didn't face what I'd faced. Knowing it had worked, that Pine Valley Estates had actually become a better place because of my 30-foot concrete statement, made everything worthwhile. Before I left, Peter showed me something else. In his office, he had a framed copy of the Architectural Digest article about the wall. Next to it was a plaque with a quote I'd given in that interview. "Sometimes you have to build walls to maintain boundaries." That's my philosophy on everything now, Peter said. "In business, in relationships, in life, know your boundaries and defend them." I drove back to my cabin that night feeling content. The wall had started as an act of defiance and revenge, but it had become something more. It was a symbol, a precedent, and a reminder that ordinary people can fight back against institutional overreach. Barbara Hendricks probably never thought about the trees she'd ordered cut down. For her, it had been just another day of HOA enforcement. But for me, it had been a violation that demanded a response. The fact that my response had become famous, had changed laws, and had inspired others was never the goal. I just wanted my privacy back. But sometimes the things we do out of necessity become bigger than we intended. Sometimes our personal battles become public causes. And sometimes a 30-foot concrete wall becomes a monument to the simple idea that your home is yours, and no one has the right to take that away without consequence. The wall still stands in Madison, Wisconsin. It'll probably stand for another 100 years, long after everyone involved in the original conflict is gone. Future homeowners will live with it, look at it, and wonder about the story behind it. Maybe they'll research it and learn about the trees, the HOA, and the man who fought back. Maybe they'll be inspired to stand up for their own rights. Or maybe they'll just see it as an interesting piece of architecture, a privacy wall that's a little taller than it needs to be. Either way, it's there, permanent, unmoving. A testament to the principle that sometimes you have to build something massive and excessive just to prove a point. And that point is simple. Don't mess with someone's trees unless you're prepared for the consequences. I'm 61 years old now. My cabin on Lake Superior has become my permanent home, surrounded by hundreds of acres of national forest. No neighbors, no HOA, no rules except the laws of the state and federal government. It's paradise for someone who went through what I did. But I don't regret the fight. I don't regret the wall. I don't even regret the stress and expense because it led to something meaningful. Change doesn't happen because people accept the status quo. It happens because someone, somewhere, decides they've had enough and pushes back. I was that someone for Pine Valley Estates. My wall was that push, and 15 years later the ripples are still spreading. HOAs across the country have reformed their procedures. Homeowners have won court cases using my wall as precedent. Entire communities have become more aware of the balance between community standards and individual property rights. All because someone cut down my trees and I refused to let it go. That's the lesson I try to share whenever I'm asked about the wall. It's not about revenge or being difficult. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard, even when it costs more than it should, even when everyone tells you to just accept what happened, because sometimes accepting injustice is worse than fighting back. Sometimes you have to build a 30-foot wall just to prove that you can. And sometimes the best revenge is living well behind that wall. Knowing you made a difference. The trees are gone, but their memory lives on. In photos, in the mural Peter commissioned, and in the minds of everyone who knew them. They were casualties in a fight I didn't start but had to finish, and their loss led to protections for countless other trees, countless other properties, and countless other homeowners who might have faced similar situations. Barbara Hendricks gave me an enemy to fight. The HOA gave me a target, but those trees gave me a cause worth fighting for. Their destruction was tragic, but it led to something meaningful. A wall that changed laws. A story that inspired people. A battle that was won not through violence or destruction, but through using the system's own rules against itself. That's power. Real power. Not the kind that comes from a title or a position on an HOA board, but the kind that comes from knowing your rights and refusing to back down. I built a 30-foot wall to block their view, but I also built a legacy that will outlast all of us. That wall will stand for generations, a reminder that homeowners have rights, that HOAs can be challenged, and that sometimes the best response to injustice is a massive, expensive, perfectly legal act of defiance. And every time someone drives past that wall in Pine Valley Estates, every time they wonder about its story, every time they research what happened and learn about the fight, the message spreads a little further. Your home is your castle, your property is your right. And if someone tries to take that away, you fight back with everything you've got. Even if it means building a 30-foot wall, especially if it means building a 30-foot wall.